Hello and welcome to the first of what's going to be an ongoing series of video essays here on YouTube, where in each essay I focus on a different aspect of popular music research. Last year I finished a PhD on Gorillaz Plastic Beach. Right on the eve of the release of their new album Humans, it seems like a good opportunity to revisit some of that research. You might be a student, an academic, or simply a Gorillaz fan. However you made it here, I hope you enjoyed the essay. Let me invite you then into the alluring world of Plastic Beach, the transmedia project Gorillaz put out in 2010 as their third album. Plastic Beach represented its own self-contained story chapter. Of course, there's been an ongoing Gorillaz story world running since 2000, and I'll be returning to the concept of story world in future videos. Another aspect of Gorillaz' career that I'm going to look at in this video essay is the fact that, as a cartoon band, Gorillaz seem on a mission to collapse the real and the virtual. It's this aspect of Gorillaz that's been discussed a lot by scholars, and I'll put some links up at the end. But particularly useful here is how they've been theorized by Roberta Hoffer and others in terms of their unique methods of metalepsis, or jumping across the boundaries of the fictional world. When Gorillaz staged their first live concerts at the Scala in London, the real musicians were hidden behind a virtual curtain, where they were visible in silhouette on the screen. Meanwhile, the virtual characters were projected as images onto the same screen. The consistent permeability of this curtain is one of the defining characteristics of Gorillaz, who are frequently agents of transition and transgression. Look at this piece of fan art, which flips the scenario. Here Gorillaz are performing on the other side of the curtain, and the playfulness of this image is really typical of their fan art, and evidence of just how flexible these dynamics can be. My main focus here is on the role location plays in Gorillaz' world-building tactics, specifically the island that gives Plastic Beach its title. As a pop band, Gorillaz' music certainly plays a strong role in helping to construct settings, i.e. a sense of time and place. However, I'm not going to cover this today, so look out for future essays on David Bowie's Outside and Jeff Wayne's musical version of The War of the Worlds to see how this happens. So we're thinking here more about Plastic Beach in visual terms. I'm going to make the case for visiting the island as an instance of virtual tourism, where the location is fictional rather than real. Christian Krug and others have theorized John Urie's concept of the tourist gaze in relation to fictional virtual reality environments, like the 1993 CD-ROM game Myst. Krug argues that the beautifully crafted digital locations in Myst are more of a draw to the world than the gameplay itself. Some elements of Myst bear a striking similarity to Plastic Beach. The islander's fictional location holds a particularly mythical power, and it's been pointed out in this 2016 book, Narrating Space, Spatializing Narrative, how islands are particularly favoured when the imagination engages in world creation. Plastic Beach is way more than an island though. It functions variously as a game world, a website, a story world, a diegetic popular music world, and an online gallery, where media objects are appreciated purely for their visual aesthetics. But what I'm more interested in here is how there are limitations of a virtual environment that might need to be overcome to make them feel more real. The obvious limitation is its lack of tangibility and materiality. Think also about how computers encourage participants in virtual worlds into relative immobility behind a computer screen. We are of course beginning to see participants moving away from the computer via pervasive gaming with Pokemon Go, etc. Indeed, Gorillaz themselves have just launched an augmented reality app called The Lens for their new album, which reveals Gorillaz content whenever you point it at anything pink. And like pervasive gaming, following Gorillaz had always been something of a treasure hunt. Fragments of videos, music, interviews and story are all scattered digitally online, and to an extent it's up to you to make sense of the pieces. But with Plastic Beach, the narrative assumed a more central role, and this was organised partly around an ecological theme. And this is where the concept behind the location comes from. The idea is that Plastic Beach is an island formed of marine debris that gets stuck together or aggregated in the middle of a Pacific Ocean garbage patch. Now, if you've never heard of these marine ecosystems before, they're a very real thing. Floating plastic refuse ends up in the sea and gets trapped within the circular patterns of these great gyres. Estimates of the size of the biggest patch range from the size of Texas to twice the size of the USA. Then, in the story, the island is discovered by the band's misanthropic bassist Murdoch. He paints it pink and builds a studio complex on the top. To make the location really engaging, great efforts were undertaken to give it as tangible a feel as possible. This image of the island we're looking at is in fact an 8-foot model, not a piece of CGI. The model was assembled by gluing small plastic toys together, and this created the basic structure of the model, which was then sprayed pink and then these beautiful tiny props were also crafted and added. Finally, the whole shebang was filmed in a water tank at Shepperton Film Studios in the UK, which you can see here below and above water. This was one of the first pieces of video to be released online, and clearly Gorillaz were hoping to draw in potential listeners by getting them intrigued about the location. This model then underwent processes of digital remediation, so that several digital versions of it could be used as the basis of a suite of arcade-style games, and also a navigable and playable website, renamed the Beach site. In the latter, you could explore both the exterior and the interior of the compound. Part of the motivation of the game was to unlock new rooms and discover locations inside and around the island. The fact that the island became navigable in this degree of detail will be crucial later when we come to look at how users responded to it. But as this essay is about tourism, what are the explicit connections between this and Plastic Beach? Well, first let's look at this postcard pack sent out as promo items. While the island is picturesque in its own way, the aim of these was partly satirical. You might be familiar with books like Martin Parr's Boring Postcards. These celebrated mundane and sometimes toxic images of civilization mid-20th century. Pop music has long appropriated the picture postcard for decorative and satirical purposes in its sleeve art. Bruce Springsteen's debut LP from 1972, for example, has its own vintage postcard for a cover. In the same year, Tim Buckley's LP, Greetings from LA, went for a darker, more ironic target. The LA where Buckley was hanging out, being drunk and seedy with prostitutes, is all documented in the album, hence this off-putting, smog-covered postcard of the city. But with Plastic Beach, it's not just touristic images that collude to make us imagine that it's real. In the week of its launch, British newspaper The Guardian staged a Gorillaz Takeover Week and posted several articles that used touristic frames. As well as a pictorial travel brochure, these included 2 travelogues commissioned from real authors. One was by literary journalist and sometime travel writer Harry Ritchie. The other, rather more psychedelic piece, was from Howard Marks, who you may know as the notorious Welsh drug smuggler turned best-selling novelist. Ritchie's piece makes it clear how inaccessible Plastic Beach is. Its coordinates aren't just somewhere vaguely in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, they refer to Point Nemo, the furthest point from any other bit of land. This situates Plastic Beach on the remotest spot on the planet, and some fans took this seriously. Here's some evidence of them looking up the coordinates on Google. Amazing what you can dig up on the internet. These coordinates give the island a mythological quality that also locate it in an intertextual web that includes hidden Pacific islands like Skull Island from King Kong, or Bali High from South Pacific. You'll find 2 other cult TV shows set on mysterious Pacific islands given concrete references in Plastic Beach. First there's the 70s show Fantasy Island, and here's its character Tattoo used in one of the games. Secondly, Gorillaz artist Jamie Hewlett has stated that Tracy Island from the 60s TV show Thunderbirds has an influence on the design of the Plastic Beach Island complex, and I would wager its construction as well. As well as being something of an inverted Shangri-La, as a location, Plastic Beach is in most senses impossible. It's unnatural, practically inaccessible. Even the scientific supposition behind its formation is a myth. You'll often find Pacific gyres being misleadingly portrayed on the internet using images like this. In fact, they're typically comprised of much smaller fingernail-sized pieces of plastic rather than the lumps of recognizable junk from which Plastic Beach is composed. Despite this mythologizing, or perhaps because of it, we're being sold the existence of the island through the manipulation of some of the channels of reality, or at least what passes as reality in our highly mediated world. As with The Guardian Week, this requires the collusion of the mainstream media, who've consistently mugged along with the conceit of Gorillaz. Interviews with the virtual band are posted straight, without flagging up their fictional nature. And this MTV Cribs special simply apes the format of its usual show. It's better to be on the inside of the joke than the outside, right? Now, Plastic Beach, at least the early part of the campaign, or the campaign that there was because funding was pulled on later music videos, is all about making a journey to get there. Gorillaz make this journey, as do their musical collaborators, like Lou Reed, Snoop Dogg, and 2 former members of The Clash. In fact, a sea journey formed the chronotype of the first 2 music videos, like this one for the second single On Melancholy Hill, and many other early pieces of visual media. And Submarine is far from being the only means of arrival. You can also make the journey by car, fishing boat, suitcase, swimming, airplane, hang glider, life raft, eating toxic waste and becoming a giant, or apparating in a mystical pirate ship. And of course, once you arrive there, you'll have to have a passport to show. However, journey here is really a metaphor for transition of state, something that we all undergo with Plastic Beach as listeners, viewers, readers, or players. Again, in locating space spatializing narrative, it's argued that the ocean that separates islands from the continents provides an allegory of the ontological difference that separates fictional worlds from the real world. This is certainly true for Plastic Beach, but I would argue that the example of an island here exists to facilitate bridges across a broader range of ontological difference. When we make transitions to Plastic Beach, as well as travelling across geographical space from here to Point Nemo, we pass from real to fictional, but also through the curtain from the real to the virtual, the material to the immaterial and beyond. We're still left with the issue though, that you can't physically visit the island itself. As a diegetic space within our own world, it's the island's heightened sense of materiality that helps to make it more tangible than most fictional locations. If you really want to visit it, and have a more embodied experience, you want things that can be touched and manipulated. Let's stop for a moment and think about Plastic Beach in terms of music distribution and consumption. Many scholars have discussed the causes and effects of the dematerialized music culture of today. With the rise of digital music, we all recognize that there's a decreasing quantity and range of new physical consumables available to be touched. This happens parallel with an accumulation of unwanted items, the cultural waste, CDs and vinyls, which Will Straw documents ending up in museums of failure. This relates to the theme of Plastic Beach, where unwanted instruments, in this case obsolete Casio-tone keyboards, are visualized as forming part of the island, washed up with other detritus on its shores. For Plastic Beach, the only physical objects you could buy were the two versions of the CD, glossy, standardized, miniaturized squares of cardboard and circles of plastic. Okay, and there was a later vinyl edition. But the point I want to make here is that in offering medial windows onto Plastic Beach's inviting tangible world, but without really embodying much of that tangibility themselves, a gap of desire is created around consumability. Here's a book cover that early conceptual artist Marcel Duchamp created called Prière de toucher, Please Touch, in 1947. Plastic Beach's online visuals echo this offer in their invitation to touch, except here it's something of a tease. Just imagine the sensation of running your fingers over a CD case. It's not very stimulating, is it? This is less a case then of look but don't touch, as look and imagine what it might be like to touch. So with Plastic Beach, media objects are delivered to users in an almost purely digital way. This creates a haptic divide between object and the user, who can only see the objects via a screen. However, there was an innovative promotional campaign in Australia that overcame this divide by sending out handcrafted plastic flowers to 20 selected music bloggers. Regular fans were not so privileged, however, and had to bridge the gap in their own fanish ways, recreating the island and its inhabitants across an impressive range of modes, which we'll look at now. This piece of Plastic Beach fan art is one of thousands of items I found posted on DeviantArt while I was doing my research. It foregrounds materiality by depicting the physical sensation of walking on all the toys that form the island. Although the art is digitally created, the aim is clearly to provoke an ouch sensation of pain from the viewer. Laura Marks argues that the flow between the optical and the haptic, haptics being the science and study of touch, is currently lacking in how our culture perceives media. Philosophers Deleuze and Guattari have also insisted that these two modes, the optical and the haptic, are not separate and dichotomous, but slide into one another. And I would argue that this image manages to demonstrate this illusion. Now look at these images from this crude but rather fun fan video that recreates an unfinished storyboard for Gorillaz' Rhinestone Eyes, and does it in stop motion. It's hard not to imagine and feel the objects within them being crafted. But building stuff these days can, of course, be much easier and more convenient if you use digital tools. And there are a number of versions of Plastic Beach that have been created using the sandbox game Minecraft. Here's another using the simulation game The Sims. I'm particularly fond of this more detailed image created on Lego Digital Designer. Then, once you've got your own mental map of the island, why not make it a fully playable environment? As with this amazing Spore game, which was created by a Gorillaz fan. And by the way, this game goes way beyond the templates provided by Spore to craft a believable playing field. The kinds of virtual tourism we're seeing here are often discussed in terms of mobility, or the lack thereof. Sarah Gibson's article A Seat with a View, Tourism, Immobility and the Cinematic Travel Glance is a good example of this. However, if you want to actually visit Plastic Beach in person, is there another way to do it that escapes being domestic, immobile, or being chained to a computer? Well, yes there is. Here's another way of arriving in the virtual, and therefore inaccessible, world of Plastic Beach. Here it's not location specifics that are active in transporting the agent to the location, but embodied acts of impersonation. These cosplayers have all dressed up as Gorillaz' popular Japanese guitarist Noodle. Then they've all gone to beaches to inhabit their fantasy. Remember the concept of metalepsis from the start of the essay? Well, this is an example of what Astrid Enslin calls participatory metalepsis, a form of interactional metalepsis that's brought to life by the affordances of digital media. Curiously, outside of cosplay conventions, location and location shoots have attracted almost no attention from cosplay scholars, of which there are now quite a few. Yet to me, these images prompt the question, is it the location that makes the cosplay come alive, or the cosplay that brings the location to life? Of course, the true fantasy of being on the island can only become complete when the images are viewed back at a later date and manipulated, touching them up with digital color saturation in Photoshop perhaps. And I'm assuming that no beaches were actually sprayed pink during the creation of these fantasies. By the way, all of this stuff is really just the tip of the iceberg, which really deserves its own exhibition. Gorillaz fan art is amazing, and I could go on about it all day. Anyway, we've arrived at the conclusion, so here are my final thoughts. As I've demonstrated, with Gorillaz, the real and the imaginative have strong tendencies to overlap in the band's own work, and this happens through the erection of a porous virtual curtain. We also see these tendencies mirrored in fan practices, although the journeys taken by the fan creators I've shown aren't just taken from the real to the imaginative or from the world of real materiality to a virtual digital one. The touristic frames for Plastic Beach, as well as its mythic island location, help to condition the experience as a journey. However, for many fans to really arrive at a satisfying destination often involves more complicated processes. They seem compelled to travel beyond the virtuality of the destination, and I argue this is prompted by the tempting materiality and haptic invitation of the media created for the project. Where this promise proves ultimately unfulfilling, the tease I talked about earlier, imaginations are prompted to reconfigure the locations through acts of building, crafting, and embodied play that entwine the physical and digital in some intriguing ways. That's it from me, Doc Popter, and I hope you've enjoyed this journey to Plastic Beach. Look out for future video essays, and don't forget to hit subscribe.